Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. My name is, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Councillor Hankins, and I'm chairing this meeting today. Now, the usual introductions are necessary. There's not a planned fire alarm, but in the event that there is, there are exits at either end of the room. I want to introduce the officers today that will be presenting the plan. They'll be presenting the plan in three sections, the three sections that you've got in the plan. And they are Ian, Caroline, Matthew, and Chris. I think you're all aware of them. So I go to item 1, receive apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies for absence from Councillor Punchard, Patterson, Blathwaite and Fisher, and there are no substitutes in attendance.
Thank you. There are no public questions, none received. So we move on to the minutes of the last meeting, which are on page 1, agenda item 3. So if we go through those minutes, can I take it that you have no objection to the minutes, but I'll go through them page by page. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Could I have a proposer for those minutes and a seconder, please? Proposed by Councillor Toy and seconded by Councillor Heinrich.
And if we could just have a quick show of hands to show that was in agreement.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Items of urgent business.
None received.
There's none received. Declarations of interest. The next item. Are there any declarations of interest in respect of today's discussion or debate? No. So we move on to the presentation of the recommendation. Now, this is a presentation of the local plan, the amendments of the local plan following comments by the independent inspector. I'll hand over to Ian to take you through this, or the first stage of this plan. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. So on your agenda pack, the report starts on page 16. What I'm going to talk to you about, though, is the action plan, which is essentially in Appendix 2 of that report. So this action plan is designed to cover the inspector's soundness issues, and the intention is, subject to endorsement, is to conduct a further 6-week consultation starting in or around the 6th of November, when reasonably practical to do so. As that date does depend on us completing the work and some third-party material being finalised as well. What I'd like to do is just outline sort of next stages, where we are, how we got there, and the way forward before we get into the detail of the action plan. So in terms of process, following this consultation, there will be a further hearing session preceded by further matters and issues questions issued by the inspector. Following the hearings, all the proposed main and additional modifications, so all the changes arising from the examination essentially, will be consolidated. They'll be subjected to sustainability appraisal and habitat regulation assessment. And I suspect the inspector will wish to reconsult on all those again before he issues his final report. So we're definitely in the latter stages of the plan examination process. At this stage, I would say that the action plan before you is considered as the minimum approach necessary. Within that plan or within this report, there are some further options which could be considered, which are outlined in section 4 of the report today. And that's the area which we could consider some further discussion and see on your opinions on that. But before we get into that discussion, I think it would be helpful if I explained where we are and why. The detail really, or the inspector's initial letter, which we received back in July, is attached in Appendix 1, which I hope you've all read at this stage. But essentially, he wrote to us advising of 3 main soundness issues that we would have to address before the examination could proceed. These are detailed in paragraph 2.2 of the report in front of you, but I'll summarise. He identified a shortfall in housing provision, not only in the entire plan, but also in the early years. So there's not enough dwellings to meet the need, and there's not enough dwellings to identify a 5-year land supply. He also challenged the approach to small growth villages and indicated that that needed some further work, although the approach itself would work, but it just needed further action. And he also sought an update to Gypsy and Travellers evidence base to reflect a change in definition used by the government following a court case which they lost in December 2023, just before our first set of hearings. So that reflected around the need, identification of the need for Gypsy and Traveller pitches. Now, you're going to ask me why the shortage has occurred, and there's a number of reasons for that. So the shortage in dwellings has occurred because of changes to the plan. The plan period of the inspector in his letter has changed the plan period from 2016 to 36 to 2024 to 2040. So he's changed it to a 15-year period as well. He discounted delivery in the intervening years by moving the trajectory back. So we've lost all those sites that would come forward early on. And he's also moved some of the larger sites in the plan, in the trajectory, back in the plan period, because he doesn't think the delivery would start when we said it would. So we have to account for those dwellings early on in the period as well. There's a couple of sites being given planning permission, although they are still in the plan. Some of those are being for less than we have actually allocated for. Some sites have actually been deleted as well. The one in Weybourne Road, Sheringham, it's actually been built, so that one comes out of the plan. But the main argument is that we lost the argument around the standard methodology and our deviation from it. So as a result of that change, our dwelling requirement per annum has increased from 480 dwellings a year to 557 dwellings. And you compare that to the core strategy, which is 400 dwellings per year. So we've lost time, lost sites, and we have a higher need figure. Now, in terms of small growth villages, the inspector accepts the approach is potentially sound. It's helped by there are similar approaches in Norfolk. Breckland have an approach very similar, and there are also other rural authorities in the east that have a very similar approach as well. But as submitted, the inspector had concerns around its effectiveness in delivering growth and also supporting the rural economy. we'll come on to those a little bit more in detail later. And then in relation to Gipsy and Travellers, again, the evidence wasn't sufficiently up to date because of the change in definition. So he asked us to commission a new study and identify a more up-to-date need based on the ethnic definition, is the word that includes those that have gypsies and travellers who have actually stopped travelling, whereas the previous government removed that from the definition. So that puts the three soundness issues, identifies the three soundness issues. In addition to that, it's been very clearly said to us that we only have one shot of getting this plan sound now, and addressing these issues. And this is the action plan before you. But the reason for that is the change in government. So the Housing Minister, Matthew Pennycook, wrote to PINS shortly after the election, advising of a change in practice in inspectors' support of local plans in addressing soundness issues. Prior to this, it was always seen as PINS were supportive to the extent of whatever it took to get a plan over the line. And you will know that some authorities have let that position go on for years without actually adopting a local plan. It's now clear that following that exchange of letters between the Housing Minister and PINS, that taking a pragmatic view has its limits, and PINS are instructed to take a harder line. I will quote, the line is, pragmatism should not be used to address fundamental issues with the soundness of a plan, which would be likely to require pausing or delaying the examination process for more than 6 months overall. I've included those letters in Appendix 1D for you all to see, and the reply from PINS. But you can see there's implications of that letter and that approach to where we are today. Now, I can advise that the inspector has seen the agenda for today, and through the programme officer, he has written to us again, and I'm going to quote what the programme officer said. He said, he says, it's cautiously encouraged by the proposals. He notes much work seems to have been done to address the main soundness issues, and say the proposed additional supply of 1,746 dwellings, if correct, endorsed by members and subsequently stands up to public scrutiny, would have a good basis for the examination to proceed. In particular, the additional extended allocations and additional small growth villages should be reliable sources of extra housing. The small growth village percentage increase should assist, but would perhaps be less reliable and maybe delivers later in the planned period. The report is right to emphasise that the limits to pragmatism mean there is really only one chance for the main soundness issues to be addressed, i.e. this one. I don't think I can make it any clearer. We need to move forward at pace. Now, before we get into any discussion, there's quite a lot of documents before you. So Appendix 2 has the proposed action plan. Appendix 3 provides draft site mapping. My colleague Matthew will take you through those sites. He's also got some actually revised mapping to share with you. There is also a draft addendum for the distribution of growth paper, which helps support the small growth villages approach in Appendix 4. Those additional small growth villages require settlement boundaries, and that's contained in Appendix 5. The Gipsy and Travellers or Caravan Needs Assessment is contained in Appendix 6, and Appendix 7 contains consultation arrangements. The majority of those papers will form the consultation material as well. Now, I'm aware there's a lot of material before you. And I think going forward, it would be beneficial if we could focus, as the chairman said, on the discussion on the sort of 5 separate areas. General approach, if you like, but I've just told you about the process, the plan. We can then have a discussion on sites, small growth villages, settlement boundaries, gypsies and travellers, and consultation, rather than taking it all in once. I think that will help the flow of the meeting, but will also allow my colleagues here who have specialised in some of these areas the chance to explain a little bit more. I could go on a little bit longer. Why it's considered a minimum is probably a question you're probably going to ask. So I think I'll cover that one now. You'll notice from the inspector's letter that he identified a shortfall of suggested round about 1,000 homes would be required to address the shortfall. He's very, very strongly indicated that that would be seen as a minimum. And he is far more comfortable with a higher number. He's also looking for certainty in delivery, and allocations bring certainty. The small growth villages, although there is demand and although there are sites, it's not as certain as an allocation. So the higher that number within reason gives the council a far more stronger position as it goes into the examination in case there are slippages, unforeseen events, sites fall out, sites are challenged and may not be taken forward. They all have an impact. So if we were to go forward now with the minimum, it's a very risky strategy, I would say. So we need flexibility. There's still ongoing nutrient neutrality issues. There could well be slippages in the trajectory as it stands now, if nutrient neutrality is not resolved. And we also, very, very importantly, need to address the 5-year land supply. So a lot of the new sites that are in the plan now can actually be delivered in the early years of the plan and address the 5-year plan, the plan's 5-year housing land supply shortage, which is essentially, you know, advisable to have. Otherwise, we'll be going forward with a plan that doesn't have a 5-year land supply, and will be an issue at the examination. And I think really that's all I wish to say at the minute. We've sites work, Matthew will go into a little bit more detail, but we've clearly gone through those sites, an assessment based on all the previous sites that are in the plan as it stands, and looked at the suitability of those sites and those that weren't needed before, but are needed now, rather than opening the floodgates and going back to the beginning and looking for call for sites. There clearly isn't the time for that. And at this stage, we're looking at the principle of the allocation. We're not looking at the detail of an application. Some members might be aware that some sites are being progressed through pre-application advice and are looking at the detail of that. We don't need to go into that detail. The scrutiny of that such detail comes through the development management committees. All I will say is all the sites that are in the action plan are considered to be needed at this stage to effectively provide us with a sound basis for going into their next hearing sessions. I recognise some of those sites are controversial. They will raise objections, but that is the purpose of the consultation. With that consultation, feedback will go back to the inspector and he will be fully aware of the issues or the local issues raised on those sites, and we will be in position at the hearings to discuss those further. That's really all I wanted to say on the sort of opening remarks and processes. If you have any questions on that, I'm happy to take those now. Otherwise, we'll go into the sites in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ian, for that. I think there's a few points that I'd like to make. I think, first of all, the message to me is loud and clear. Second to me is pragmatism seems to be the deal of the day. And that's really around, I think, the tight timescales and the risks that are out there if we fail to get this plan home in time. And those risks, to me, are almost paramount, because we have put in so much work, you have put in so much work as officers over the years, and I'm talking, to my recollection, 6 or 7 years. And to fail to get this home would not serve that work well, nor would it serve our residents and businesses in the district well, because that would open the doors to mayhem, as I would see it. So our focus has to be to get this through, expedite this through with the minimum of delay. And I am content with the approach that has been suggested, and I'm also content with the action plan. And I don't think it will serve us well to spend too much time going into the detail of all this, because I think there will be opportunities for the detail to come out in the course of the consultation. But there is one thing that I would suggest that we do, perhaps ahead of the consultation, and that is to ask each ward member to look at the action plan, to look at those proposals in their wards, principally the small growth villages, because they haven't had the degree of examination that the larger sites have. And in my own ward, I have spotted a couple of errors that need to be put right before the consultation takes place. And there are two reasons for that, really. One is clearly we want to get that right. And the second is we want public confidence to be at its highest. So we need to be seen to have done our homework and got the information spot on. And so their focus and our focus from then on should be the merits of each of those proposals and the place that they might have in the amendments that need to be made in the future. So a check of accuracy for those site proposals, I think, would serve us well. And I think there's probably sufficient time to do that if we're talking about, is it the 6th of November being the start of the process for the consultation?
We're aiming for the 6th of November, so that follows the next cabinet. It could be a little bit flexible, depending, just in case we don't get the HRA information in time, but around about then, so we get it in before Christmas, yes.
So for me, this is a piece of work that we need to get on and do. And I won't dwell on any more comments, because the longer I speak, the more it will slow the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor, yes.
Thank you, Chairman.
Your second.
Strangely, I'm largely in agreement with Councillor Dixon for once.
Yeah,
It's a
indeed.
novel event, I must say. We've got a gun held to our heads. Government sitting behind us, a bloody great cannon, if you'll excuse my language. So we've got to get this right, or things will be a darn sight worse. However, you know, in terms of North Walsham, I do have grave concerns about having to potentially include NW16. You know, North Walsham is being asked to take well over 2,200 new dwellings anyway. We've given up the essential access road from Cromer Road into the industrial estate for various reasons, which don't concern us at this point. That will impact on economic growth in the town, yet we're going to increase the population even more. If we look at this site, it was originally rejected. It's remote from the town centre and services, extension to open countryside, adverse effect on landscape, highways access and local network unsuitable. Yet that space, that Richborough estate still came forward in 2017, making vague promises, including 45% affordables. And I believe that as much as I believe the government promise on anything, learn from a developer. Yet that then became evolved by Regulation 18 into sort of a much more mixed review of it. Yes, the environmental issue is still there, negatives. Some, what I think somewhat spurious claims about other aspects. Good access to local healthcare service. Tell health people in North Walsham we can't get doctors' appointments for 3 to 4 weeks. We're adding yet more. Doctors don't come to North Walsham. They don't want to do geriatric medicine, basically, which is why they don't come to Norfolk as well. Good access to education facilities. If you know North Walsham, you can't walk from the top end of Munsley Road to Manor Road schools in any sensible timescale and safely. Right, taking a very circuitous route. And even then, you've still got to cross Crow Road, which is now a major thoroughfare. So that doesn't really work. Healthcare facilities, currently way over towards the station. Where the new medical centre will be, I do not know. Likely, I think, Cromer Road or Norwich Road. Again, remote. There's no public transport links on that side of town that will be of any use. So people are going to be dependent on private cars. Now, I know an access to a roundabout, curiously at the top of a hill, on a, looking where the road drops down to 2 blind bends and 2 narrow bridges. I'd like to know what highways think about that. Then 330 houses on this site, minimum 700 vehicle movements a day, probably a lot more, maybe 1,200. I don't know. I'm not a traffic modeler. But where are they going to go? They're going to then filter back into town, medieval streets. At least the western extension takes traffic away relatively easily and will have good transport. They'll clog up the traffic, 2 traffic lighted junctions on the Cromer Road and Norwich Road. School run traffic would have to head down past Lingate Road or through Lingate Road, Crow Road, up the very narrow Bacton Road or Bluebell Road. Problems. There's no drop-off in parking spaces. Even the school could cope with more, and that's the one school in the town that is virtually full. And then I come to that issue, which is in the EDP today again, is Coltishall. A lot of these residents there, unless we're going to bring in all retired into that estate, will be heading for Norwich to work. Another 300 plus cars a day through Coltishall, in addition to what will come from North Walsham West and the existing Norwich Road permission site. I'm sure Broadland and certainly the Coltishall residents will have something to say about that. It suggests it has good access to employment. Well, it's close to the industrial estate, yes. That is not the major employer and certainly not of high-skilled workers. It's a general engineering, light engineering site. So traffic is heading for Norwich. I'm also concerned about the potential impact on North Walsham West development. They did a very detailed traffic analysis with all sorts of mitigations proposed. The effect of putting NW16 in means that that will have to be revisited because there'll be much more impact on certain junctions and potentially Norwich Road itself. Unless you're expecting traffic to then turn up Cromer Road and then back down the new Western Relief Road when that gets built. And that's be long after this, I suspect. So who's going to pay for that new traffic study we need? An economic assessment was done there, but mentioned high-speed broadband. Well, thank goodness we are finally getting fibre broadband in North Walsham. When it goes live, it remains to be seen, because BT are still standing around looking into manholes, wondering what to connect where. It talked about town centre and is easily accessible. It's not by public transport unless there is a radical revisiting of things like a hopper bus around the town. I'm not convinced parking provision will cope. You know, we might actually get Mounsley Road car park full, but probably over full. Where will the new shopping provision go to meet yet more houses? It'll have to be out of town. That will impact on the town centre, which already, well, it's doing remarkably well considering we've still got some shops empty, but they tend to be tiny ones, which for historic reasons are never going to be viable today. Then there's a report of the affordable housing. I go back to the press reports from 2017, Richborough are happily saying 45% affordables. Okay, so we build an expensive roundabout, a new access road. Oh, suddenly the viability says we can't put any affordables in. We know what happens with these sorts of developments. They start off promising the earth, and then it all vanishes. Suddenly they find all sorts of reasons why it's no longer viable. It's the affordables we desperately need. It's not more houses for rich people from Essex and North London to retire to the countryside. We have to avoid that somehow, and that's the same with all the proposals. We're in a situation where we're not building for local people. We are building to provide retirement properties for people from out of county and out of the district. And that is wrong. I fully understand the position the inspectors force us into, and that's not helped by the dictatorial pronouncements we're getting from this incompetent government we've now got, even worse than the last one so far. Yes, the site has developers actively promoting it. They wouldn't be doing that if their sole concern wasn't profit for the shareholders. It's not for the benefit of the district. They've sensed an opportunity. So like sharks, in they come to predate. They are not concerned about the adverse effect on my community of North Walsham. We've already accepted 2,200 for the next 15 years. That's more than enough for a small town with limited infrastructure. Unless we're going to get a lot more facilities, where are they coming from? Health service isn't investing. Social care isn't investing. They can't get the staff anyway because they don't exist. Because we've got too many old people and not enough young people who are doing the work. Remember, the town has good infrastructure, basically built around a population of 6,000 or so. We're going to add another 6,000 by the time we've finished. I can't see the water supply coping. I can't see the sewage supply works coping. Those water towers, I said before, they existed when I was a lad growing up in that town in the 60s. In those days, they'd pump them up in the morning from diesel pumps from the reservoir, pump them up again in the evening. Now there's electric pumps running continuously just to maintain the supply. A serious issue which hadn't been considered in this one. Across the proposals, I can accept further growth in the villages. I think that's healthy, keeping the populations alive. Hopefully, bringing in younger people, so the schools are still there, so the social facilities are still there. I can just about accept Clifton Park, albeit, as I've said before, I believe there needs to be a strategic gap between Cromer and Runton. I do feel that we're looking at a quick fix solution. As Councillor Dixon said, I have to agree, we haven't got any time, potentially, that we could have looked for developments of small amounts of 40 to 50 houses in larger villages. You know, thinking Melton Constable, for example, Saxthorpe Corpusty and others, where this would possibly work. We need development across the district, not lumped onto one town. Really don't think there's been a lack of imagination here. But the inspector, the government, the developers have the upper hand. And I find that this particular bit unacceptable. That doesn't mean that I'm looking at thing overall. I'm wholly against it, though I may abstain. I haven't decided yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Heinrich, for your contribution. There is no doubt that this will be a challenging situation. There is no doubt about that. The points that you raise, I live in North Walsham, as you know, come up frequently. Healthcare, education, parking, all of those issues will come to the fore. However, they'll be no different to anywhere else, quite frankly, in my view. So I think it is important to take the case that Councillor Dixon raised. I think we have no choice but to plan for success. Now, in doing that, there is a consultation period of 6 weeks, and those, I'm sure those issues that you raise will come up, particularly in North Walsham. But nevertheless, thank you for your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. I totally understand the pragmatism and the need to get this through, but I know that the allocation in Blakeney will be unpopular, and it's outside the settlement boundary since the neighbourhood plan was made. So I don't know, and it's next door to protected landscapes, and there will be a reaction about that. Weybourne as a small growth village is a unpopular concept, and the increased allocation there in a village that doesn't really take to development, that's going to be unpopular. So there's going to be headwinds for this. I echo what Councillor Heinrich has said, except from a more country perspective. And so I'm finding it, I totally see why this has to be approved, but I'm finding the detail of it difficult to swallow. I think Clifton Park is a sad loss. Are we allowed to talk about the travellers now, or is that later section? Because I totally endorse the travellers section and the recommendations in it, but I was disappointed to see there was no referral to the appalling difference in longevity for travellers and the educational attainments, which are very dramatic. And the educational attainments were somewhat skirted over in this particular report, but they did mention the longevity, and I thought that we should pay heed to that. And if we are putting in any places for travellers to stop, whether transiently or more semi-permanently, we should have a nod to that, because I think it's disgraceful that travellers have such a poor life expectancy, and I think we should acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and may I extend my good wishes to you, Mr. Chairman, in your new role, a role that I have been very familiar with down the years. So, and I wish you well in the future in that respect. This working party does have a history of healthy unanimity, and I think that this morning will be no exception. I agree entirely with what members have said, particularly grateful to Councillor Dixon for what he said in support of the recommendations. That said, and I don't want to go into any particular sites because I think that there will be other opportunities for that. I just want to say that I'm absolutely amazed by the approach of this new government. We've gone from a methodology which allowed us to start with a blank piece of paper, look at the situation locally as a local authority, and move from that position to plan for the numbers that we feel are needed locally. That's been taken away from us. So I have a lot of sympathy for our officers who have spent years, as has already been said, preparing our draft development plan, to have the rug pulled effectively from under their feet in a matter of months since the 4th of July and the election of the new government. The government have decided that what they will do is they will appoint someone in Westminster, no doubt with a spreadsheet, to look at delivering numbers across every part of the country. And I think they've been quoted as saying, you know, every area must play its part, as though it's sort of, you know, like some war effort on attack on local authorities and their local plan making. And in a sense, it doesn't really, the numbers in a sense don't really matter because developers will determine what is built in the context of the plan. The plan is to, if you like, curb the enthusiasm of developers to make sure that we honour our corporate plan and deliver houses in the right areas where people want them in the district. But just to give you some idea of the seismic change and the hurricane, if I may be contemporary with today's news, that the government have set off through the emerging local plan. Between 2001 and 2024, we delivered a total of 8,604 new dwellings in the district. That equates to 374 dwellings per year. So we started with that in our emerging plan with a challenge to the methodology, as Officer Withington has mentioned, using the 2016 census figures rather than the 2014 census figures, which seemed logical at the time. And that delivered 480 dwellings per annum moving forward. So in other words, not a massive change from the average that had gone before it over the previous sort of 10, 15 years. So that then increased to 557. The inspector came back after the inspector's examination, came back and said, well, we'd like something closer to 940 or 943, I think, to be precise. And we're now looking at 1,746 dwellings per annum. Where is the consideration by the government in this 70% increase, which is worse than some areas? In London, it's actually minus figure. It's a percentage minus figure. So, the government has said every area of the country must play its part. Well, London isn't. And we've got, extremes. The nearest one, I think, is West Norfolk, where the increase will be 80%. So, they're actually under greater pressure percentage-wise than we are. So you could argue that we're somewhere in the middle in the increase that we've got to make. But is the person in Westminster aware of the constraints that we have in our area, the 45 miles of our coast, the 35% different designations of national landscape, of the A and B, the local nature reserves, the SSSIs, the one of only a handful of rural conservation areas in the country, in the Glaven Valley, and 81 conservation areas. Have they really looked at what those constraints place on us? I don't think so. We've got 56% of our areas affected by nutrient neutrality. There's very little, as we'll come on to see in our response to the NPPF, about the effects of nutrient neutrality. So, in a sense, we can play with numbers, and local people can feel aggrieved that they've gone through a consultation process, and now they're virtually being, ridden roughshod over their views by a government that, when it was elected, said, "Oh, we're here. We must listen to people." Well, they've a peculiar way of demonstrating listening to people by bringing this stringent top-down target system and dumping it on us at such short notice. And then, to add insult to injury, put the arm of power back and say, well, you've got to do it within 6 months. Okay, you can take 6 years. We'll let you take 6 years to get your emerging local plan right. But actually, you know, what we tell you to do, we'll only give you 6 months, which is, well, you know, it tells its own story. So I'm not going to say very much more. You'll all be very pleased to know. I'm sure there'll be other opportunities to develop what I'm saying at Cabinet down the line when we perhaps have a greater public audience, media engagement. But in the meantime, I reluctantly, with a heavy heart, am wholeheartedly as a portfolio holder in support of the officer's recommendations. And I thank them from my heart for all the work that they've done and the immense pressure that has been put on our planning policy team since July.
Thank you,
Thank you, Mr.
councillor.
Chairman.
Yeah, I just make the point that we need to bear in mind that there is a desperate shortage of housing. There's no question about it. It's a national shortage. The development of that plan will depend upon local authorities. My big question is, quite frankly, well, first of all, your question is to the independent inspector. How did he arrive at this? Whether that's a sensible question that we can ask him, I don't know. The second question is, it's not a question of where, it's a question of how. Because in order to develop additional houses, you need developers. And there's a lot in this paper about deliverability. And I'm not convinced that deliverability is there, personally. I'm not speaking as the chairman. But thanks for your contribution. Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, thank you to officers. Clearly, there's a lot of work gone in here, as has already been said. Clearly, it is a challenge. It is clearly something that has come from government. It's government driven. We do not have the time. If we need to have a plan, because if we don't have a plan, we're open to all sorts of development. Therefore, we must develop a plan, and we must do that in short time. No matter where we go, whether that's in our district or in the country, there will be challenge to development. We need to keep in mind, I believe, that this is actually development over a long period. The period of the plan has been extended, if I understood that correctly. So there's a longer period to develop this extra amount. And as already been said, it will be done by developers. Some of the challenges that have rightly been raised in terms of, you know, schools and medical facilities, these are challenges that are already here. And whilst there is also the talk, and we don't know where government's going to go with that, with devolution. So I think it's incumbent upon us to ensure that outside of this committee, that those devolution deals give us access to those wider facilities that we need, and that we work, particularly people like myself who sit on the cabinet, to forge the links, to work collaboration, because whilst we administer this area of North Norfolk, and it's a wonderful area with all the special features that Councillor Brown's already laid out, but actually we may have facilities that would suit our people just over the border, or we may be able to do facilities for people just over the border from us. So I think we need to be a bit more holistic in how we go with that wider picture. But certainly without the plan, we are in a very difficult place. There will be challenges. The consultation will raise those, and maybe some more sites may get suggested. I think we need to, I think it was Councillor Dixon said about members being engaged with that process. So just let me check what I've got here. Yeah, so yeah, there is no one size fits all. One thing though, just on the villages part that I don't see in the, where you put out the key services, secondary services and desirable services, I don't see transport mentioned. And I think transport, we can't expect a bus in every village. That is not going to happen. But actually, if you live on a housing estate, the bus doesn't necessarily come through your door. You have to walk down the road. So a bus in the next village, a mile away, may be something that makes it more viable and more accessible. I think we need to, again, understand that more holistically. And again, I think beyond this, it is incumbent upon all of us to work to find better ways to deliver transport. Although that doesn't sit within this authority, we need to engage with other authorities that do deliver that. So I welcome where we're going. Again, I thank officers for the work they've done, because this is a big challenge, and in a short time scale, there's an extremely good starting point that we can get out there to consultation. I think the process has been laid out well. And again, I don't know if it's been proposed or seconded or whatever, and I'm happy to sit in that camp. But I think there's a bit more that officers would like to discuss with us before we go to consultation. And I leave that now to roll with you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, councillor. Yes, I would emphasise the point that I think it's up to all of the members to talk to their parish councils about this ongoing sort of pressure. In my experience, I've already spoken to 6 parish councils in my ward, and there is an inevitability that there is going to be some expansion. Of course, when it comes down to it, it will be fine. You know, we understand the problem, but we don't want it here. I'm almost certain that'll happen. But there is an inevitability of a recognition of a direction of travel, which I think opens up the case for a more constructive dialogue. Let's put it that way. Thank you. Are there any other questions or contributions? Councillor.
I just think we're at a situation where it's a gun against the head with us. I don't think we've got any choice. We've got to do what we have to do, and that's all there is to it. It's not good, whichever way you look at it. Some people are going to be really pleased with us. Officers done a hell of a lot of work on this, tried to get things right. We're now put in a position where it's going to triple possibly how many houses we're going to have in the near future. It's crazy.
Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, I just want to give my thanks to the officers for the fantastic hard work they've done in this process. It's quite clear to see that a lot of effort and a lot of time has been spent on this. So thank you for everything you've done. Based on your point in regards of a consultation, I think as local members, we really need to put in the effort and engage with our communities, engage with our parish councils, and ensure that there's communication from both sides coming through the process. It's so important that we get that grassroots knowledge and then that's sent up the line to planning policy officers. That's what we should be doing as the role of local member in this process. Just want to talk briefly about Ludham as local member. In the whole, you know, in principle, I do support what's being proposed here. I think Ludham certainly has capacity for new housing. The parish council certainly agrees, but we need affordable housing. We need social housing. And I just have concerns of what's being proposed, these 40 dwellings. I mean, I could be wrong, and I'd love to be proven to be wrong, but I can't see all of these being affordable housing. And certainly we had a successful application which was passed in 2022. None of those were affordable. It was proposed that we would have 2 to 3 affordable dwellings, but what did the developer do? Well, they decreased the housing numbers within the application and then said, actually, it's not viable. Yes, we got some Section 106 monies, but it's not good enough. It's not good enough. But I'm aware that's a separate matter. That's you know, that's a planning application issue. But it does feed back to this. You know, and I think certainly with those villages, Ludham, Hoverton, other parts, there are concerns over foul drainage. And when it comes to planning Anglian Water, yes, they have a legal obligation to ensure that there is capacity, but we just need to make sure that when it does get to the application stage, that these new housing developments aren't going to exacerbate already the implications. And certainly in regards of Ludham, that previous application I've spoken about, they decreased the housing because of concerns on the implications of foul drainage. So we just need to make sure that we're putting in all the effort, all the engagement and lobbying to Anglian Water to ensure that when we do get to the planning stage, when these do become applications, that these don't have grave implications on existing issues. I think I'll leave it at there.
Thank you, councillor. I mean, you make the point that we're really, in considering any application, it needs to be, for want of a better phrase, joined up. There needs to be water supply, purity supply, and so on. That's a very difficult situation. We're dealing with different bodies, aren't we? But nevertheless, unless it's worked out, it won't be achieved. Thank you. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me a second bite at the cherry, so to speak. I just want to clarify and add a little bit to what I've said. When I speak and what I've said and what I'm about to say, I say as an appointee to this committee, looking across the whole district. I'm not here wearing my ward hat for Houghton and Tunstead. And I think that's important because our considerations have to be across the district. That doesn't mean to say that I don't have my ward considerations in mind. Of course I do. But I also have the broader considerations in mind. And you know, the points that Councillor Heinrich make on behalf of North Walsham, I completely identify with those, and in particular, you know, the transport links. But they will have to be addressed as we go forward, as we take this plan forward and through the various stages. So I think it's important that we just kind of recognise that we've got that broader responsibility. We will have the opportunity of representing our wards and dealing with those individual sites in due course. And I think it's important that we distinguish that what we're about today. I also agree that whilst we will decide what will go into this plan and be presented and hopefully approved, the delivery of it is very much another matter altogether. And that's a whole different set of challenges on which we don't have our hand on the levers. So it will be developers in the market that will determine the extent to which the local plan is delivered and when. And so we've got to do our bit, and we've got to deliver what the government expects us to do. We understand that. As I said in the very beginning, the message to me is very loud and clear. And the risks of not doing so, quite frankly, are unacceptable, and they are paramount in my mind. Just turning to the small villages section, I had meant to mention actually that it seems to me that there might be merit in clustering some of those small villages together, because just thinking about my own local patch, if you think of them as individuals, they don't stand up in terms of sustainability or viability. But if you cluster them together and the degree to which they will be able to support and contribute to each other, then as a cluster, they become much more viable. And I think we need to look at where that clustering might be appropriate and enable us to put more into those than we might otherwise do. And just to pick up also to add a little bit of what I said about local members, I'd like to kind of make a proposal if I could, and that would be just to kind of strengthen what I've already said, that I believe it would be really helpful if every ward member were asked to look at this action plan and to look at their ward responsibilities. So some may not have any in their ward, well, lucky them, but some may have several. And I would think that it would be really helpful if they were to look at those in detail and verify whether the details are correct or not. And furthermore, when they attend their next parish council or town council or whatever council it might be meeting, they raise those proposals. And I think that, Mr. Chairman, should be an expectation that we as a committee, because we are only a sample of the 40 that represents this district. And we should have, I think, an expectation on our peers to be able to do that on behalf of officers, in fact, as well, to help make sure that when this goes out to consultation, some of those wrinkles that are in there will be ironed out. So I'd like to make that as a proposal to kind of add to what we've already got before us, please.
Thank you, councillor. Is that an amendment?
I would suggest, just because this, the working party isn't a decision-making body, so any recommendations from the working party must go to cabinet. The next cabinet meeting being the 4th of November, and the consultation supposedly starting on the 6th of November wouldn't allow enough time. So rather than a formal proposal, perhaps the acting planning policy manager could send communication to members, rather than being a formal proposal, and then maybe have a offline opportunity for members to have a bit of an update session and then communicate out. Because if it's a formal recommendation, you're missing the deadlines just because of the dates involved.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you.
More than happy.
You
It
accept
could be
that?
done by whatever means.
Okay. Thank you for your contribution. Thanks for the point. And I think we will do that. Okay? Any other points? Could I address? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, thank you very much for your feedback. I would just say to thank Councillor Dixon. Yes, this is a very strategic plan, and obviously the purpose of it is sets the framework for the council, putting out essentially a lot of its own corporate agendas to try and frame development in climate change matters and move it forward. And it's very, very important that this plan moves forward to allow the council to then put that forward to developers and decisions to be made in terms of climate change, and also allow that framework and the discussions to bring growth into the district and infrastructure that comes with it. That's the point, and I think you all get that. The documents before you are all working documents. They're all drafts. So yes, we are still working. I'll be contacting Councillor Dixon to find out where he thinks there's some errors in which we can correct and have a look at. But yes, they are still working documents, and we are working through them, and we will probably be working through them all the way up into the consultation to finalise those. I'm quite happy to write to ward members. I will also be writing to parishes and town councils as well, advising of the changes and giving them notice. I think that's only fair. What I just would like, we've kind of deviated a little bit from where set out. I think it would be very important, I guess, to ask Matt to introduce a couple of the sites. There are some changes to the mapping, which I think it's correct just to show you as they evolve. And then I'll introduce Caroline, and she can just very briefly outline the methodology for the small growth villages, which could address some of the questions also that's been raised.
Thank you.
I think all of that would be just helpful for you.
Before we get to that, I have one other question from Councillor Hollier.
Thank you, Chair. I must say this new pragmatism and rush direction of travel doesn't serve us well in terms of our homelessness problem, in that, you know, our small level of affordable houses that's going to be delivered through this, if it indeed gets delivered, because of the infrastructure that also has to get delivered. And I can see this making referring back to Councillor Heinrich and the only population growth being inward migration. It doesn't serve our population well. And I appreciate that this has been imposed on us by higher tiers, as it were, but it doesn't fill me with any confidence that it's going to improve our homelessness situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, councillor.
In that case, I'm just going to ask Matt to very briefly outline the sites and his changes in the maps at this time.
Thank you. So as Ian alluded to, the process that we've taken has been twofold, and sites have been categorised in the background paper as A and B. Before I go into these, I just want to mention that because it's been mentioned a couple of times today. We did early on consider finding new sites. However, this would require updating the HELA. It would mean doing another call for sites and appropriately assessing these sites, which even then may not even be considered suitable. And unfortunately, there's just not enough time to do that process effectively. We did look at all settlements and all sites assessed, and these are in the background paper. We've been quite fortunate as well that promoters have been pursuing these sites whilst not being included in the plan. So a lot of technical information is already there and has been shared with us. We've been engaging with promoters extensively already, and the consultation that we'll be doing in November will be an opportunity for relevant consultees to provide views if we haven't pursued already. So I'll just do a very brief overview of the methodology behind what we've done. So as I said, the site's been split into two categories, category A and B. Category A sites are those that have been previously assessed through the assessment process, and they were considered suitable, but were not selected for allocation due to strategic reasons. Included in this category is also those sites where we considered an extension to be a possibility, which could then lead to a higher quantity of dwellings on the site. Of course, this has been done for a number of allocations. In category B sites, these involve more detailed review of our site assessment process in the booklets to identify any sites that were discounted from the process originally, but actually has some potential to come forward, albeit on a smaller scale. Of these sites, 3 have been included in the background paper, but only 1 is being considered at this time, which is STO4-A. We did also look at HVO5 in Hoverton and C19 in Cromer. I'll just do a very quick overview of our conclusion for those 2. So for C19, just land at Compit Hills, we initially looked at a smaller portion of this site to see if it's capable of delivering a smaller capacity than was originally put forward. However, we've engaged with Highways already, who put forward an objection to utilising access on Taunton Road. So we therefore do not consider this site is suitable at this time as an option for allocation. For HVO5, which is land at Horning Road in Hoverton, we initially discounted this site in the assessment in the booklets due to its extension into the open countryside. Upon review, we still likely stand by this assessment, and at the time have not received enough evidence to justify whether a portion can mitigate this constraint. However, in recent days, the site is being actively promoted, and this has stepped up recently. They are keen for the site's inclusion in the plan, but their proposals are currently for 200 dwellings, which would double the overall delivery for Hoverton. We are open to reviewing this site again upon member instruction, but for now, the site is not considered for inclusion as an allocation, and there are other avenues available to them at this time, such as going through the development management process or neighbourhood planning routes as well. So that was kind of an overview of the background paper. As Ian alluded to as well, we have got some updates to the site boundaries for a couple of maps. Lauren, if you are going to bring up the changes, thank you. So the one you can see before you, this is Bristol. So originally in the report that we provided, we included land north of Fakenham Road. We decided to remove this from the allocation to allow a bit more flexibility in what they could provide. But at the moment, we have policy for Bristol 2 in the current local plan for them to provide a car park on site. We originally then thought about potentially including land north of Fakenham Road, to allow for the promoters to explore alternative options for that. We then reviewed that and had a bit more discussion with the promoters and decided that actually that isn't required, and actually that might constrict, including Land North Fakenham Road would potentially constrict that process even more. So we decided to revert back to what is before you. So the areas hatched, they are the current allocation areas. The area of red to the south of Bristol 2, that will be the extension. And as you can see, we're no longer including the land north of Fakenham Road, but the requirement to provide a car park on site will still be there for policy Bristol 2. However, we will allow them the opportunity to explore alternative options if they wish to. Next map, please. So the one for you, this is Clifton Park. The main change for this, the boundary hasn't changed. However, in the report we sent you before, the extent of the built form, which is the red area, extended much further south. Through discussions with the promoter, this is actually now reduced this back up further north. So now the site's providing more open space. And yeah, it was more of it was just an error that the red area shouldn't have extended so far southwards. Next map, please. This is NW16 in North Walsham. The main change here is that the land to the northwest, which is the triangular parcel of land, is now being included in the site boundary. This is to help facilitate access from the main road. However, we will make it quite clear that this will be for the access only and no residential development will be provided on this northwestern portion of the site. And I believe that's all the map updates we have. I'll hand back over to Ian.
Thank you, Matt. If I could now ask Caroline just to very briefly outline the approach to small growth villages and listed villages, that I think would be helpful.
Yes, and thanks for all your comments so far on the small growth villages. As you've seen from the inspector's letter, he's very keen for us to explore this particular tier of the our distribution of growth across the district, and sort of made it fairly clear that he wanted us to at least look at a tier of villages that had one key service and 3 secondary or desirable services. So in effect, that's the piece of work that has been done. That started off at 10 villages, and I carrying out a review of all of the other villages within our distribution of growth background paper. I discovered another 2 villages of Erpingham and Felmingham actually meeting that sort of core service requirement. All of the assessments are in Appendix 4 for you to look at. It's a fairly methodical approach. We've used exactly the same methodology as previously for the existing small growth villages, with the exception, as I say, that we're just looking for 3 secondary or desirable services. We still look at any environmental constraints, local housing needs, everything else. So it's all there, and it's all scored and fed into the conclusions. So 10 villages of the 12 assessed came out as being suitable. One slight anomaly is Beeston Regis, which in effect, its key services are in the adjacent town of Sheringham, basically within accessible range to get to, and this scored it as being appropriate. So that's a slight anomaly in the small growth villages. The 2 that were not identified was Swanton Abbott, which has 1 key service and 2 secondary or desirable services. And the other one is Neatishead, which is slightly unusual in that it has 1 key service and 2 secondary and desirable services. And its primary school is in an adjacent settlement of Butchers Common, and the church, which is the other qualifying service, is also slightly further away in 3 Hammer Common. And it's a point that maybe I think we've put forward as an option as to whether we look at that type of clustering of services to maybe incorporate Neatishead as a small growth village going forward. So that is actually something that members may wish to comment on. We've also looked at the proportion. Again, the inspector put forward an option of looking at the percentage of growth in this tier of the settlement hierarchy. And we have proposed a 9% growth. That is very much, well, it's for a number of reasons, and one of the main ones is the NPPF looks for you to have approximately 10% of your growth on small to medium scale development sites. And if we add the 10 additional small growth villages to our existing list at 9% growth, that would give approximately 873 dwellings. That's the opportunity. And our housing requirement is 8,900. So you can see we've tried to pitch it to align with really what we should be looking for. Obviously, an option would be to have a lower percentage. That takes approximately 100 dwellings off that 873. And in the other way, if we went for a slightly higher percentage, at say 10%, that would add another 100 dwellings on. So it would take it up to about 970. You're going to have to say that. You didn't hear that. Ian's trying to whisper in my ear. So there's the sort of wriggle room, but also I take on board Councillor Dixon's point about looking at other sort of clustering of villages. I've looked at all of the other villages really within our background paper, just to see what we've got. And in fact, the inspector did ask for that information as part of the hearings, and it is in one of our sort of documents we submitted to him. There's about 7 villages that qualified with 1 key service and 2 secondary or desirable services. They're Colby, East Runton, Gresham, Hindringham, Kelling, Neatishead as it is, and Swanton Abbott. He was also interested in other villages where there wasn't a key service, but there were a number of secondary services, and there's 7 of those. They're Bodham, Cly, Edgefield, Holcombe, Salthouse, Stiffkey, and Hickling. I did a very limited kind of whistle-stop desktop study just to look at what sort of environmental constraints and things those have. At least 5 of them are heavily constrained with sort of flood risk, sensitive landscapes, lots of environmental constraints. But there is approximately about 9 of those villages that could potentially become a further tier or maybe infill development. So that is something that if members felt would be worth looking at, we could look at. I think I'll probably stop there for now and answer any questions if necessary.
Yeah. If I could just add to that, obviously there's a couple of options there. However, there are risks that come with those options, mainly to do with the time it will take to do that further work. We would not be able to hit this timeline in front of you, be quite frank on that. In terms of clusters and functional link, that was an option for this local plan, which was rejected some time ago. It was an issues and options matter. So we have considered that approach. That would be going backwards. I would suggest probably more dispersed growth, which is how it was presented to the committee at the time, was rejected. But going forward, let's talk the next local plan. It is probably something that would have to be considered much more in order to meet the higher targets should they come through the NPPF. So potentially that's something down the line, I would say.
Yeah, it is, Mr. Chairman. I'm really, but I'm not taking too long. I just really wanted to add to what Ian has said, really. And the point I want to make here is, I think we need some plan B and C and D, I think, as well, because I think the deliverability of some of our bigger sites in particular, and some of our more challenging sites that we've mentioned this morning, may put us in a position of risk and exposure. And I think the more contingency we've got, the better place we are going to be, because the last place we need to be is being picked off with no 5-year land supply. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just going back to the small growth villages, because, well, I've got 9 villages in my ward, but I'm not into that. As Councillor Dixon rightly says, we look at the whole picture here. But it goes back to what I was saying before, where you talk to villages that have things nearby. Do we consider what might be nearby over the border? Because Felmingham, which is not in my ward, sits right near our southern border, and the sort of Aylsham conurbation, if you like. Erpingham is close to that, but we've also got Itteringham you've spoken about. I mean, we've got Corbesty down the road from that, but again, that's also right on the border. So do we consider that when we look at what's around? Because there may be things that aren't there, but are. Thank you.
I mean, for the small growth villages, not really, to be honest. I mean, we are sort of spatially aware of, if you like, what the nearest sort of towns are in effect, but it is really more about, and always has been, that sustainability for that particular village. What has it got day to day that means you don't have to get into your car? That was really the sort of basis of the approach for the methodology.
Which goes back to my thing about transport as well. If we consider transport, it may well be there, but just down the road. So I think there are different connectivities. I also understand the need to move on and not find new sites. I would just like to think that as we consider each site and review them through the consultation, that those things are given consideration. That's all I'm suggesting at this stage. Thank you.
Absolutely. Just on that point, actually, the methodology just says main road in terms of secondary service. That actually incorporates much more than that. It just doesn't say it. So that is actually a fault of the methodology. It does actually look at public transport links, but it just doesn't make that very clear. But it is something that is actually looked at. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Hindwick.
Okay, just very briefly, Chair. Yeah, I think an issue we need to look at with small growth villages is where the residents perceive their main services to come from. You know, you can live in one village and logically you'd say, yeah, we all go there, but they don't, they go there.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I lived in Ridlington for a while as a child, and you either went to North Walsham, or for certain services, you went to Stalham. Or medical service, you actually went to Munsley. So, you know, people in a village will have different ideas of where they're going to go, and that impacts on what sort of transport links they're going to use. You know, it's a fascinating PhD study with somebody, I think, at some point. Coming back to where I was earlier, overall, yes, we are about the whole of the district. And while I have great reluctance for certain aspects of this, the clock is ticking and the gun is pointing. So we're going to, much I dislike certain aspects, we're going to have to go with it.
Thank you, Councillor. Of course, in some of these villages, there's a natural development, but adjacent villages, they get involved in all kinds of things, fates and what have you. So there is a natural affinity, which should be understood.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I'm working on the early stages of calling it a rural strategy, but we're all rural anyhow. But and part of that questioning is how do people relate? Because I know for a fact in Erpingham, you know, I live just north of Erpingham, and I tend to come to Cranham and Sheringham, but people in Erpingham tend to go to Aylsham, and we do need to understand that interrelationship. Not going to help us here, but I think they're an important thing in our considerations. Thank you.
Well, on the other hand, in my ward, the focus is on Pakenham. because the services have been taken out. I'm sure that's been taken into account when we consider these various. But on the other hand, some parish councils are very sort of restrictive in that they don't want anything to do with them down the road there because they don't fit into their particular scheme of things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. If we're all reached the stage, I'll move on to Gippsland Travellers, if that's okay. So in the report, there's a small section on Gippsland Travellers. We've obviously updated the study. It takes into consideration the ethnic definition. So those that have stopped travelling are included. That new study identifies a need of 12 pitches over the revised plan period of 24 to 40. The previous study was 8 pitches from 17, I think it was, to 36. So it's pretty much the same level, if you like. The trend continues. The need is mainly derived from those existing families resident in the district. And the growth from those. The policy in the plan, HOU 5, is a criteria-based policy. It doesn't allocate any sites or anything like that. It just says, subject to the following criteria, support will be granted for applications for new pitches. It's proposed that we continue with that approach. Nothing new has come out of that study to warrant anything different. Apart from putting the level of need probably within the policy, which we've proposed to the inspector is actually a modification, not a consultation item. But we've asked him to clarify that and whether we need to reconsult on that policy with that slight amendment. But other than that, I'm not proposing that we change the approach. Or the study doesn't give us any reason to change that approach.
Okay.
Yeah, if there's no other questions, then the next item really is the consultation arrangements, which again are laid out in the start on page 22 of the report pack. Really, we're just proposing that once endorsed by Cabinet, we will be in a position with finalised material, including the background paper which covers the more detailed assessments, all the documents that we have today, plus the finalised essay and finalised HRA would go out for consultation. The dates are designed so that we get this in before Christmas. We will then have to summarise the comments and provide them all to the inspector along with our summary. We may well be able to do that before the Christmas break, depends on the feedback, but we should be able to keep on top of it is my hope, which would then expedite dates for hearings into early next year. Haven't really got more to say on that. We're following our standard communication process set out in our statement of community involvement. So your statutory notices, we write to everybody on our databases and all the statutory people, and set it up for online and paper responses. I'm looking at Chris. All right, so I'm just saying we'd set it up for preferably online responses, but there would be an option for people to write in or email as per normal. But it would be a fairly quick turnaround following any resolution at Cabinet. That's it, unless there's any questions.
Mr. Chairman, can I just clarify where the statutory notices are delivered or displayed, as the case may be?
The statutory notices are a formal notice of consultation. They would be publicised on our website. They would be sent to everybody who's so far contributed to the local plan, so it's on our local plan consultee database. They would be publicly put in the papers. Is that correct, Chris?
Sorry, yeah, they'd also be sent to parish and town councils for sort of dissemination through that process as well. I think Ian's covered the other availability, but quite a wide range of readership would receive it.
So our clerks in the parishes can expect to receive the notices for placing in notice boards in villages and towns?
The parish councils and town councils would receive the statutory notice and
Okay,
have to
yeah,
display
yeah.
it, yes.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
Council.
Will there be paper versions as well? I remember last time that was much well, not all the parishes wanted them, but some find it difficult to look at things online, and you made some hard copies available.
Hard copies of the consultation documents or the response form. We normally provide hard copies at libraries and in council offices of the documents themselves. We would provide paper copies of response forms and allow people to send those in as well, yes.
Would you have a limited number of hard copies of the consultation document, not the responses, available for parishes where they have a very high percentage of people who don't do online reviews?
I think if we received a request for them, we would normally respond and provide them.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. We move on now to, I think we've covered the comment on the risks of this particular policy program. And community and safety issues. So we now come on to item 14, conclusions and recommendations. Unless anyone has any further points to make, I would ask that the Planning and Policy and Built Heritage Working Party commend to Cabinet 1, the draft action plan is endorsed and taken forward to the time outlined. The updated evidence and background papers are endorsed. The consultation arrangements and communication plan are endorsed. And that delegated authority is given to the acting planning policy manager in consultation with the planning portfolio holder to finalise the action plan. Do I have a proposer and a seconder for that motion? Proposed by Councillor Dixon, seconded by Councillor Toy.
On the microphone, and I apologise. Additional wording after action plan in point Roman 4, it says and consultation material and continue to respond to the inspector's questions during the examination period and hearings.
Okay.
So just to be absolutely crystal clear that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Councillor.
Thank you.
Yep, so we've got a proposer and seconder. Mr. Chairman, if it's just a show of hands of members for the recommendations that are voted on block.
Yeah, so we need a vote, do we?
Need a vote, yes.
Yeah,
I've got
okay.
a proposer and a seconder, but I haven't had a vote yet.
All those in favour? All those against? The motion is carried. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Jim, I hope it doesn't disrupt officers' Christmas too much, seeing the timescales. I thank you, because I'm sure it will take some of your time, but I acknowledge that up front. Thank you.
It's another Christmas ruined, I should say, and domestic bliss in the Willington household. I will have to be making it up to my wife continually. That should be noted, actually.
Okay, thank you. So I declare this meeting closed. Sorry?
We have another two items,
Sorry?
Chairman, but they're just for information only.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, okay, go on.
If I may, sorry, the second report is just for information only on the NPPF, really.
All right.
Andrew, Councillor Brown alluded to it earlier that obviously there's been a consultation on changes to the NPPF. And there is a summary of that consultation in the report pack. I'm just trying to find the page for you. I don't intend to go into that. I can't because my document's gone blank. But essentially, officers reviewed the emerging proposals for the changes to the NPPF, and in conjunction with portfolio holder and the assistant director of planning, a response was submitted to the government on that. I suppose that I've tried to cover off the main items in that document. Many of the items in it were actually supported. Some good changes to affordable housing approach. A lot of the changes reversed those changes brought in by Michael Grove previously in December. But the biggest change, I suppose, is the change to the standard methodology, which Councillor Brown alluded to there earlier today. And it's proposed that we move away from locally derived housing need targets to those based on existing housing stock in the district and a set percentage growth, which actually results in a growth requirement of 943 per annum for North Norfolk. Clearly, as we've heard, our past delivery rate is way below that, and obviously we've written to say that it's not an appropriate response to housing growth within North Norfolk, and listed various reasons for that, saying that any revised approach needs to have an element of local considerations into it, not least market, environmental factors, housing need, and so forth, and population as well. As you quite rightly point out, the majority of our growth is through in migration to the district. The population of North Norfolk is aging, and by the time the end of this plan period, there will be a significant proportion of elderly over 60s, even all the way up to the 90s. And in some forecasts, that could actually indicate a population decline rather than growth. Nevertheless, the government is moving away from population projections and putting forward much more ambitious growth targets to meet the 370, I think it is 370,000 requirement annually across the country. It does. We're not alone. Yet all the districts in Norfolk go up. Kings Lynn get a 1,042 per year. Norwich is 828. Well, Greater Norwich actually, because they're combined, as a 2,647. But theirs has gone up not as much as ours, and Breckland are 917. So yeah, they're quite drastic if they're imposed. Couple of other things in there. You'll have all heard talk about greenfield development and greyfield development. So obviously they're proposing development on green belt areas, sorry, with a preference of 50% affordable housing. We don't have green belt, so it doesn't affect us, but the concept, if you like, is an interesting one given our environmental designation. So it'll be interesting to see where that argument goes in terms of any revised NPPF. There's also various discussions within that NPPF about transitional arrangements. between plans. Our plan is at examination and it is being examined against the September 2023 MPPF. So if a new MPPF comes in, there's two distinct processes. The local plan's being examined against an older one. Development management decisions would be against a new one. That in itself would probably prompt our inspector to suggest that we would go into a review against certain areas of conflict, I would imagine. But you never know. But there's also a line in that MPPF consultation that says if your housing target is 200 dwellings per annum below that of the new target, the government would expect an immediate review of your plan. We don't know if that will stay, but clearly the ambition of this government is to push forward with growth agenda. And I stick by my guns. The sooner we get this plan adopted, the sooner that we have that cushion to consider options properly and in due course, rather than being forced. The response that went back is attached. I don't intend to go into it, but unless there's any questions on that. And there's a link in the report as well if members wanted to see the changes in the MPPF. It takes you to a track change version, which was handily provided by the government for once. Okay.
Okay. No other questions. I'd like, on behalf of myself, thank Ian and his team for the work that they've done on preparing this amended, revised, whatever you like to call it, plan very quickly. And so, but if there are no other business, I declare this meeting closed at 20 to